Imagine waking up in a world where gods walked among mortals, not as metaphors, but as rulers in golden crowns, as pharaohs in flesh and blood. Imagine towering monuments carved from solid stone, not for the living, but for the dead. And yet they still stand, untouched by time, as if eternity itself bowed before their builders. This wasn't fantasy. This was Egypt. A land where the line between myth and memory blurred, where tombs whispered prayers to the stars, and death was only the beginning of a greater journey. Welcome to the Eternal Kingdom. Welcome to Egypt. If I told you that more than 4,500 years ago, humanity built something so perfect, so massive, that we still struggle to explain it today, would you believe me? In Haze lay a civilization so advanced, so organized, so deeply spiritual, that they didn't just build pyramids. They built forever. What if I told you that deep beneath the sun-scorched sands, beneath the heat, get yourself a warm drink, turn the lights low, and lean back. Let the wind of the Nile brush against your imagination, because what you're about to hear isn't just history. They planted barley, fished its waters, and worshipped the strange rhythm of the flood. Every year, the river swelled, overflowing its banks and feeding the land with thick, dark silt. The Egyptians would call it Kemet, the Black Land, its legend, mystery, and the unbreakable will of a people who dared to challenge the gods themselves. This is the full, untold story of ancient Egypt and the secrets of the pyramids, and it begins long before the first stone was ever set. Long before pyramids pierced the horizon, before hieroglyphs whispered secrets across temple walls, there was only silence. He became the first pharaoh, a living god, chosen by divine right to rule both heaven and earth. And with his rise, the story of ancient Egypt truly began. Dust, wind, the Nile flowing endlessly, like a ribbon of blue laid across the desert. But where others saw wilderness, early settlers saw something more. Every grain of sand, every breath of wind had its place. The river was more than water. It was life. It was time. It flowed from the heavens and curved across the desert like the spine of a god. Everything revolved around it. And the pharaoh? He was the human embodiment of this balance, the heartbeat of the universe, a promise. Around 5000 BCE, wandering tribes settled along the banks of the Nile. It was here that civilization sprouted like papyrus, one reed at a time. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and over centuries, two rival kingdoms emerged. One in the north, the other in the south. They were different, they warred. But from this chaos rose a single man, Narmer. It's also known as Menes. The black soil left behind was unlike anything else. Rich, dark, almost magical. He didn't just unite the kingdoms, created Egypt. He wore the double crown, red for Lower Egypt, white for Upper. He designed a structure of 6 stacked platforms at Saqqara, a step pyramid, made of limestone, immaculate. But what was Egypt really? It wasn't just a kingdom, it was an idea, cosmic balance. The people believed in mat harmony, order. His job wasn't just to govern. Huge slabs fitted perfectly without cement. They invented ramps, levels, and levers. Geometry, astronomy, and administration evolved hand in hand. It was to keep the cosmos from falling apart. To build this empire of order, the Egyptians turned to the Nile, their calendar, based on the flood, their agriculture, shaped by its cycles. When the river rose, farmers rejoiced. It meant fertility, prosperity. With this blessing, Egypt didn't just grow, it boomed. Fields flourished, crops soared, surpluses fed cities. And cities brought specialists, scribes, potters, soldiers, priests. But above all, architects. Because Egypt wasn't content with surviving. Egypt wanted to leave a mark that eternity could not erase. And so came the first great leap, stone building. While the rest of the world was still building in mud brick, Egypt dared to carve into stone. And then, a man named Djoser ordered something the world had never seen. A tomb not dug into the ground, but stacked high toward the sky. It was bold, ridiculous, impossible. But one man believed it could be done. His name was Imhotep, vizier, priest, scientist, and the first recorded architect in history. It was more than a tomb, it was a message. a ladder to the heavens, a stairway for the soul, and the world watched in awe. But the Egyptians weren't finished. Over the next century, they experimented. They dreamed bigger. Under Pharaoh Sneferu, they tried new shapes. The bent pyramid, which changes angle midway. Then came the red pyramid, with smoother sides, and finally a vision that defied reality. Vision held by Sneferu's son, Khufu. He wanted something monumental, unshakable, something that would last not for centuries, but for eternity. The result? The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2560 BCE. This colossal monument was over 146 meters tall, taller than any building for the next 3,800 years. More than 2.3 million limestone blocks, some weighing over 80 tons. No cement, no machinery, no written plans, and yet perfection. Each side aligned with true north, south, east, and west, with an error margin of less than a degree. The internal shafts aligned with specific stars. The entire structure was engineered with such precision that even modern scientists still debate how it was done. The base was nearly a perfect square. Others, more fantastical. Speak of ancient alien contact. How did they move the stones? Water on sand to reduce friction? Wooden rollers? Giant labor forces? Something more mysterious. Some theories suggest lost technologies, but maybe, just maybe, it was something simpler. Faith. Faith in their gods. Faith in the afterlife. Faith that building something eternal would earn them eternal life. Its eyes gazed across the desert, its mouth forever sealed in a secret smile. Beside Khufu's pyramid rose two more, one for his son Kafir, and one for his grandson Menkaure. And nearby stood a silent guardian, the Great Sphinx. A lion's body, a human face, carved from a single block of limestone. Larger than a 6-story building, there were cosmic engines designed to launch the soul of the pharaoh into the stars, to sit beside Ra, the sun god, and journey across the heavens. The Great Pyramid even contains a mysterious king's chamber and queen's chamber, connected by narrow shafts pointing directly to Orion's belt and the star Sirius, both associated with the afterlife. But while these monuments soared skyward, Egypt below remained vibrant. Homes bustled with life. Markets echoed with voices. Bakers, brewers, and builders kept the cities humming. Children played in courtyards. Mothers recited prayers to Isis. Farmers sang to the Nile. And everywhere, the people believed in eternity, not just for their rulers, but for themselves. This is where the magic of Egypt lives, in the ordinary and the extraordinary woven together. As centuries passed, the pyramid era faded. Pharaohs turned to new burial styles. The Valley of the Kings became the new home of the afterlife. Hidden, secret, guarded, but the pyramids remained. They stood, silent, massive, unmoving, a testament to what humans can build when they believe in something greater than themselves. Their tombs moved away from the open desert into hidden valleys, deeper, darker, more secret. But Egypt's greatness didn't fade, and that is only the beginning. The pyramids stood as Egypt's eternal monuments, but time, even in this timeless land, marched forward. As centuries passed, the Great Pyramid builders were gone and new pharaohs ruled. No, this was the first intermediate period. Egypt was no longer one. Rival kingdoms emerged. Thirst and hunger took the place of worship. Tombs were looted, temples desecrated. It evolved. After the pyramid age came chaos. A time when the throne fractured, the gods fell silent, and famine swept the land. But Egypt always comes back. Did a tale not of gods, but of humanity. Loyalty, regret, redemption. Over 9 days, he delivers speeches so powerful that they echo across history. The moral: even the lowliest man has a voice worth hearing. Egypt no longer sought just monuments. It now chased meaning. From the south, a new power rose in Thebes, a city sacred to the god Amen. Fortresses rose on Egypt's southern borders. Canals connected the Nile to the Red Sea. Trade expanded, wealth poured in. And at the heart of it all, one idea held Egypt together. Mat, the the divine balance. And under a visionary pharaoh named Mentuhotep II, the land was reunited. A new age dawned, the Middle Kingdom. Gone were the pyramid builders. In their place came poets, engineers, and philosophers. This was an age of reflection, of stories, of wisdom. One tale, the story of Sinna, tells of a courtier who fled Egypt after the king's death, only to return years later, begging forgiveness, longing for burial in Egyptian soil. Another story, the eloquent peasant, tells of a poor man pleading for justice before corrupt officials. Over 9 days, he delivers speeches so powerful that they echo across history. The moral, even the lowliest man, has a voice worth hearing. While the scribes wrote, the builders built. Fortresses rose on Egypt's southern borders. Canals connected the Nile to the Red Sea. Trade expanded. Wealth poured in. And at the heart of it all, one idea held Egypt together. The divine balance. But once again, the calm would shatter. The north, a mysterious people arrived. The Hyksos. Foreigners from the Levant came with chariots, composite bows, and new weapons Egypt had never seen. The Hyksos seized the delta and ruled for over a century. But the Egyptians, watching from Thebes, learned. They studied their enemies. They adapted, and when the time came, they struck. Amos I, a Theban prince, drove the Hyksos from Egypt and began the era we now call Egypt's Golden Age, the New Kingdom. This was Egypt at its peak. Gold flowed in from the mines. Tribute came from conquered lands. Temples reached for the heavens. The empire expanded from the Euphrates in the north to Nubia in the south. And among all the kings, one ruler stood out, and she wasn't a man. Hatshepsut ordered grand building projects, including her stunning mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, carved into cliffs, painted with vibrant scenes of divine birth and trade missions. Her name was Hatshepsut, a daughter of royalty, a wife to a pharaoh, a regent to a boy king. But when her husband died and the throne was left to a child, she stepped forward, her statue smashed, her name chiseled from walls. Not as queen, others' political image to keep male pharaoh dominance intact, but the truth, but as pharaoh. She dressed as a man, wore the false beard, took the full titles of kingship, and against all odds, she ruled. For over 20 years, Egypt flourished. The images carved on the temple walls show trees being brought to Egypt, the first known attempt at transplanting foreign flora. One famous journey under her reign was to punt a land of incense, gold, and exotic animals. She was not a conqueror. To remind the gods in the future that Egypt was eternal. He introduced new battle strategies, set up administrative centers, and brought back wealth and exotic treasures. She was a creator, but after her death, her stepson and curler Thutmose III erased her name from history, literally. Why? Some say jealousy. You cannot erase greatness. Today we know her name, speak it with reverence. Hatshepsut. Her story survived, like Egypt always does. After her, Thutmose III became a military genius. Known as the Napoleon of Egypt, he led 17 campaigns into the Levant, capturing over 300 cities. Under his reign, Egypt was not just a land, it was an empire, and temples across Thebes. His victories were carved in stone, not just to celebrate, but to immortalize. And while kings battled and priests prayed, ordinary life thrived. He was born into splendor, a prince of divine blood, son of a mighty pharaoh, raised beneath temple shadows, fed on myth and ritual. But this child, Amenhotep IV, was not like the others, but one. He looked to the skies and saw not many gods. Not Ra, not Osiris, not Amen, but a sun disk, a burning, radiant orb, force not bound by form or face, a god beyond gods. He named it Aten, and what he did next would shake Egypt to its core. When Amenhotep IV became pharaoh, he did the unthinkable. He shut down the temples of the old gods. He banned the priesthood of Amen, one of the most powerful institutions in Egypt. He declared, none, the only true God, and himself as the living prophet. He changed his name to Akhenaten, servant of the Aten. He built a brand new city from scratch, Akhenaten, now known as Amarna, the city for the sun, a capital that faced the light. In art, Akhenaten appeared not as a chiseled warrior, but soft, androgynous, alien. He was drawn with elongated limbs, wide hips, and sloping features, holding his family in gentle scenes of domesticity. Basking in the rays of Aten, it was a complete break from tradition. Imagine this. In a world where the gods were eternal, fixed, and many, suddenly there is only one. Entire belief systems erased, temples abandoned, worship rewritten. Some called him a visionary, others a heretic. The people were confused, priests were furious, but Akhenaten remained unwavering. He ruled for 17 years, isolated, radical, alone, and then he vanished. No great burial, no grand tomb. The city of Akhenaten was abandoned, his statues defaced, his name scrubbed from records. Egypt had had enough. The old gods returned, the temples reopened. The people reclaimed their faith. But in the wake of Akhenaten's revolution, one figure emerged, a boy, barely 9 years old. Born in chaos, crowned too soon. His name, Tutankhaten, living image of Aten. But under pressure from priests and generals, even his name was changed. He became Tutankhamen, living image of Amen. The gods were back, the past restored. Tutankhamen ruled for less than a decade. He died mysteriously around age 18. No one knows how. Malaria? A broken leg? Assassination? His death might have been forgotten like many others, except for what happened more than 3,000 years later. In 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter, after years of searching, found a stairway buried beneath rubble in the Valley of the Kings. At the bottom, a sealed door, intact, untouched. Inside, the only royal tomb never looted. When Carter held a candle through a small hole in the wall, he uttered the famous words, "Yes, wonderful things." Inside was a treasure so vast, so golden, so astonishing. It changed the world's image of Egypt forever. A golden death mask resting on the face of a boy. Chariots, thrones, weapons, games, perfumes, sandals, jewelry, statues, even food, all preserved for eternity. Tutankhamen, the forgotten boy king, had become the most famous pharaoh in history. But along with his fame came fear. Disease, accidents, mysterious illnesses. Newspapers declared a curse. Members of Carter's team began to die under strange circumstances. The curse of the pharaohs was born, an idea that opening ancient tombs invited wrath from beyond the grave. Truth, coincidence, hysteria, we may never know. But the legend endures, and so does the boy king. While Tutankhamen became legend, Egypt marched on. New rulers rose, including one who would become the most powerful pharaoh of all time, Ramesses II. Known to history as Ramesses the Great, he reigned for 66 years, longer than any other king in Egypt. He built more monuments, sired more children, and fought more battles than any pharaoh before him. At the Temple of Abu's symbol, his statues rise 65 feet high, carved into living rock, staring down the Nile with eternal pride. In battle, Ramesses led the famous Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, the world's first documented military engagement with a written peace treaty. Power fractured again. Foreign dynasties ruled from the Delta, Nubians from the south and Libyans from the west. Though the battle was a stalemate, Ramesses declared victory and etched his triumph in temples across the land. His reign brought splendor, but it also marked the last true peak of Egyptian power. After Ramesses, the line of pharaohs weakened. Invasions increased, corruption spread. Tombs were looted, and temples fell into disrepair. By the time of the Third Intermediate Period, Egypt was no longer the invincible giant it once was. Still, Egypt endured. Through sheer cultural force, it remained proud. Even foreign kings adopted Egyptian customs. They wore the crowns, worshipped the gods, spoke the language, built in the style of their predecessors. Then, in 332 BCE, the next great chapter began. A man arrived at Egypt's borders, young, brilliant, undefeated. His name, Alexander the Great. The priests crowned him pharaoh. He visited the Oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis and reportedly emerged saying he was the son of Zeus-Ammon. The Macedonian conqueror swept through Persia, then into Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator. Alexander didn't stay long. He left to conquer the world and died in Babylon. But his legacy remained. Egypt now entered the Greco-Egyptian era, the Ptolemaic dynasty, named after Ptolemy I, one of Alexander's generals. For the first time in history, Egypt was ruled by Greeks. But here's the twist. The Ptolemies embraced Egyptian culture. They built temples in the old style, honored the gods, learned the language, and one day, the last pharaoh of Egypt would be born, not a warrior, not a priest, but a queen. Her name would become legend, Cleopatra VII. She was not born in a pyramid. She did not speak the ancient tongue of the pharaohs at birth. She was Greek by blood, Macedonian by descent. But in her heart, she was Egypt. Her name was Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh, rose in a time of turbulence. The once mighty Egyptian empire was a shadow of its former self. The Nile still flowed, the temples still stood, but Rome, the rising titan from the west, loomed like a storm on the horizon. Unlike her predecessors, she learned the Egyptian language, wore a native dress, honored Egyptian gods. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a symbol of rebirth. Cleopatra was 18 when she became queen, intelligent, fierce, charismatic. But power in Egypt was no longer enough. To survive, she needed Rome. And so began one of the most iconic alliances and love stories in all of history. Cleopatra, bold and brilliant, famously smuggled herself into his palace wrapped in a rug. Julius Caesar, the Roman general who crossed the Rubicon and changed the world, arrived in Alexandria amid civil war. He was captivated. With his help, she defeated her brother rival and solidified her throne. A child was born, Caesarion, a symbol of East and West united. But the Roman tide was fickle. After Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra turned to another Mark Antony. Together they ruled the Eastern Mediterranean, lovers, allies, rulers. But Rome would not tolerate division. The Senate declared war. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, marched against them. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, the dream crumbled. Cleopatra and Antony were defeated. Cleopatra, days later, followed him into death. The methods still debated: a poison, a snake, a final act of defiance. Fearing capture, Antony fell on his sword. With her death, Egypt was no longer a kingdom. It became a Roman province, but with silence. The 3,000-year reign of pharaohs ended not with fire. The temples faded. The gods were forgotten. The language of the hieroglyphs lost. Egypt fell into shadow. For centuries, travelers walked past the Sphinx and the pyramids, wondering what they meant, who built them, and why. Egypt was reborn, not in power but in curiosity. The sands buried cities. The stories died with time. It had 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs. And then, something changed. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt. But he didn't just bring soldiers. He brought scholars, scientists, artists, linguists. They studied every ruin, sketched every statue, documented every temple. And then came a discovery that would crack the code of the ancients. In 1799, near the town of Rosetta, French soldiers uncovered a black stone slab, the Rosetta Stone, the key. For decades, scholars tried to decode the forgotten writing of ancient Egypt. Mummies were unwrapped at dinner parties. Obelisks were shipped to Europe, museums filled with sarcophagi. Then, in 1822, a Frenchman named Jean-François Champollion succeeded. He unlocked the hieroglyphs. The gods spoke again. The stories returned, and the silence was broken. The 19th and 20th centuries, Egyptomania gripped the world. And in 1922, when Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb, the entire planet watched. Egypt had come back. But it wasn't just about gold or mystery. It was about legacy. In every temple wall, in every carved name, in every perfectly placed stone of the Great Pyramid, there was a message: we were here. We believed. We built. We remembered. Modern Egypt rose from this ancient soil. Cairo bustles with life. Mosques echo the call to prayer, the Nile still flows. But above it all, still watching, are the pyramids. They have survived earthquakes, invasions, floods, empires, and time itself.
Now why?
Because they were not built just with stone. They were built with faith. Faith that death was not the end. That memory mattered. That greatness was not about wealth or war, but about what you leave behind. And so we ask, what did they leave? Monuments? Yes, mysteries absolutely. But more than that, they left a mirror to humanity's potential, to dream, to endure, to believe in something bigger. Even as the world modernizes, the pyramids remain, not just relics, but reminders. That once, long ago, in a land of sand and stars, humans became gods. They raised cities from dust, they turned stone into eternity, and they whispered to the universe, "We will not be forgotten." And they weren't. You've now walked through 5,000 years of myth, history, triumph, and tragedy. But the journey doesn't end here, because as long as the pyramids stand, the story of ancient Egypt lives on.